So we've had this slight leak with the oil tank. This bracket had come away from the tank here, it cracked here, and so I've had it brazed up by my local car repair body shop, and so hopefully that'll be fine now. So what we're going to do is put the oil tank back on the bike, and the oil tank is held on in 3 places. So these brackets, that one that we've welded on, and this bracket, then these brackets have these strange sort of top hat rubbers that go in, and then this very strange sort of screw bolt goes into the rubber, and then through the bracket on the frame, which we'll see in a minute, and then it screws on. It's held on with those bolts. That's at the top, and then at the bottom we got this strange sort of protuberance here, and you've got this bracket, and the bracket goes inside the rubber there. I'm going to do it one-handed, and then this bracket, the actual mounting bracket, is free to turn, so that the idea being that you can sort of locate it in exactly the right place, and that's held on by this small bolt here. So if we come to the bike, so those are the 2 mounting brackets for the top, where those rubber top hat bushes go, and then down here, there on the back of the frame, that's where that strange bottom bracket fits. Okay, so we're just going to put it back on. I've just loosely sort of cleaned up this area. It doesn't matter too much because you never see it. It's behind all the cases, etc. But obviously we just cleaned it up anyway. So we're just going to put the oil tank back in now. Okay, so I just came to fit the oil tank, and I offered it up, and I realised, having done that I need to fit this weird sort of bracket that goes at the bottom of the oil tank. You need to fit first, because it's just about nigh on impossible to get that bolt in at the bottom. I mean, it's impossible to get it in anyway, even with this bracket, even without the oil tank in the way. It's a nightmare. So I had to hold the bolt down with a screwdriver, so I could then just manage to turn the spanner to get it to take, because it's just a nightmare. Anyway, so now that is loosely in place. I should be able to tighten it when the tank's on. But with that bracket in place, now I put the tank onto the bracket, which is why, of course, it is that spigot thing, because you can actually sort of lower the tank onto it and then get these 2 mountings lined up as well. So you need to get that bracket on first. Okay, we actually managed to get the oil tank back on, but what a job that was. Because you have to put this strange bracket on. You have to have it on the tank. But having it on the tank means that you then got to get this bolt in afterwards, which is nigh on impossible. And in the end, what I did was I had to get a screwdriver on the top of it to push it down. So then I got a spanner on it until I finally got it to take, and so I could screw it in. But the first time I did it, I sort of got the tank in situ, and I thought, oh, there's no way I can get that bolt in like this. I must fit this strange bracket first. So I took it all off and undid the bracket and put the bracket on, which I could just about do a bit easier without the tank in the way. But then I realised, no, it's actually just impossible to put the tank on that way. So you have to actually have this bracket in the tank and then bolt it on afterwards. Complete nightmare. And then at the top, you have these brackets that go in the top hat rubber bushings, and through these brackets, well, my God, I could not get them through. And of course, this strange sort of screw bolt thing comes out and hits straight into the oil sort of tower. That's the overflow, the feed that goes to the rear chain. There's a little pipe there, and there's a screw in there, and see that screw, and by adjusting that screw you can adjust how much oil goes out down. This oil pipe goes on there, and that goes and drips onto the chain. What I generally do, and most people do I think now, is just turn that right off. and then lubricate the chain in other ways, because otherwise you get loads of oil all over the place. But you can still use that. That's what the little screw's for, to adjust the chain. Lube comes out of there, a little pipe, it goes down, sits on the swinging arm and drips onto the chain. So that is actually the main oil. That's the breather in it. That's the main oil feed return. Let me get this right. That's the oil feed return there, and that is the breather, and that goes from there down onto the back of like the gearbox, onto the engine breather, which sits by the sort of starter motor. Okay. Anyway, yeah. So that sort of strange bolt thing comes out, and of course it has to be pushed in to get it on the bracket, and it can't be fitted from that side. It has to be fitted from this side, so it's sticking out the back, and of course it just digs into the paint. I'll have to repaint all that on the tower, and that's why it's all scratched anyway in the first place. I mean, I'm sorry, but who designed these things? I'm not joking. I mean, well, what can you say? What can you say sometimes? Anyway, the oil tank's back in, and I'm very glad it is, and it's going to stay there. So anyway, but I've mentioned it because it's quite a common problem. I had it virtually exactly the same on my T150, that this rear bracket had also fractured. In my case, the bracket was still on, but it had split the tank, and so there was oil dripping down all the back of the tank. I couldn't work out where it's from. I thought maybe it was from the cap. But then I realised that there was no oil actually on the sort of cap tower, if you know what I mean. And the oil, and I've worked out that it was actually split there where the bracket joins the tank, and that was the problem. Because they are tin, basically. Well, tin, a thin metal. And I think with the vibration, they fracture. They do fracture there. So it's a common problem, but nightmare to get back on. Anyway, it's on. Hurrah! There we go. Onwards and upwards. But whilst I'm doing that, it brings us on to a bit of a controversial subject, which always makes me smile a bit. And that is, I'm fitting an anti-drain valve to the bottom of the oil tank to stop the engine from wet sumping. So this lovely oily thing is the old one that I've just taken out. And this is the new one, which has a non-return valve fitted. And that will stop the bike from wet sumping. I've talked about this so many times before, so I'm not going to go into great detail, but they are controversial because they completely stop the wet sumping. That means that the oil draining into the engine, the oil stays in the oil tank and doesn't drain into the engine, even after months. It doesn't do it. But they're controversial because people say, well, they're a bit dangerous. Because they can sort of cause a blockage or whatever, and then starve the engine of oil. Mainly because these valves are sucked open by a vacuum of the oil rather than pushed open by the volume of the oil. The ones in the engine, the original ones in the engine, which unfortunately simply don't work, which is why we're changing them, are pushed open, little ball valve. But they just don't work. These work really well, but they are pulled open. Now, there's a lot of stories about them failing and this, that, and that. I've got them on all my bikes. I always say this. I'm not recommending them. I'm not telling people to do it. All I can tell you is I've got them on all my bikes. So that's 3 bikes on my Commando, my T160 and my T150 as was, which I've now sold. And never had any trouble whatsoever with them. To my mind, it's more dangerous not fitting one, only because if you leave the bike standing and all the oil drains into the sump, then when you go to start it, then you've got no oil pressure because there's all that's coming into the oil pump is air from the empty oil tank, and so for 30 seconds or a minute, you've got no oil pressure. Of course, you can get around that by what some people do is they drain a bit of oil out of the primary chain case and then pour it back into the oil tank, which is fine. But to my mind, that's a bit of a faff. It's just easier to fit one of these. As long as it's fitted properly. The only time these are going to fail is immediately after they're fitted, as far as I'm concerned. You have to prime it, make sure that the pipe that this goes off is full of oil so that it can suck the valve open. We'll come on to that, when we actually come to fill the engine with oil. But after that, they're fine. Now, you do have an oil warning light on a Trident, and then you don't have one on a Commando, so I fitted an oil pressure gauge. So, you know, you can tell if you haven't got oil pressure. Especially I fitted an uprated one on my T160, so it really flashes brightly, so I can't miss there being oil failure should it ever happen, oil pressure failure. So anyway, this one is from LP Williams, and I fit them. Some people don't. You can listen to the horror stories or whatever, but you know, you pay your money, you take your choice. That's all I can say. To my mind, they're great and they work perfectly. To other people's mind, they're a sort of disaster waiting to happen. You know, that's all I can say really. But you know, I've had a word with the owner, and we're fitting one to his bike, and you know, I'm sure it's fine. As I say, and especially with the T160, because you can chug it over on the starter, so you know you've got oil straight away. But we'll come on to all that when we fill the bike full of oil later on. Okay.